I'd like to introduce Dr. Kylie Heales. Kylie serves on our faculty here, is a research affiliate here with the Center for L.I.F.E. and is an assistant professor here. Kylie is going to lead us through a panel conversation talking about the challenges and opportunities of publishing in this space. So Kylie, take it away.
Thanks, Brett. Welcome, everyone, to today's panel discussion. As Brett mentioned, we're going to be exploring the challenges and opportunities for publishing on faith and entrepreneurship in the top-tier management and entrepreneurship journals. So we've heard a lot this morning from some very intriguing published papers that have made it through the process. And what we're really going to hone in on for this panel is that process of publication and making it a reality for all aspiring authors in this space. Joining me today on the panel are Professor Stephanie Fernhaber from Butler University, Aslan Gümüsay from LMU-Munich, Peter Klein from Baylor University, Robert Pidduck from Old Dominion University, and rejoining us is Miruna Radu-Lefebvre from Audencia. So Amanda will be posting in the chat for you some further biographical information about each of our panelists, including in email contacts if you want to reach out to them after today's session or today's conference. During today's panel, we will be focusing on audience questions, so please use the chat and or raise your hand function to join in the conversation if you'd like to. I'll be monitoring that as we go. But to start us off, I would welcome each of our panelists to share some brief opening remarks before we jump into a few prepared questions, and then I'll open it up and direct some audience questions as well. So Stephanie, would you like to join us first?
Sure. Thanks so much, Kylie. Stephanie Fernhaber here at Butler University. Excited to share some thoughts and actually hear from others as well. So thanks for allowing me to be here.
Ali.
Yeah, thank you. Greetings from Berlin. It's also exciting to be here. It's the second day of Eid, actually, so I had lots of sugar today. So I'm overexcited, I guess. I'm a great fan of life, not death. So it's wonderful to be here with you all.
Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Klein from Baylor University. I also have had plenty of sugar today, but I have no legitimate reason for having done so.
Rob.
Hi, everyone. Rob Pidduck from Old Dominion University in Virginia. Like the others said, it's great to be here, and I'm excited for the conversations that will follow.
And Miruna.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. For sure, in France, chocolate is our religion. Well, plus wine, but well, let's keep it secret.
Wonderful. Thank you, each of you, for joining us today. So in our conversations in preparation for this panel, it's really interesting to juxtapose or explore, what are opportunities and what are challenges? Are they the same thing? Actually, do they present at the same time? And so to open up the questions, our first question is, what are the opportunities and challenges for authors working to publish in top-tier management journals? And panelists, feel free to jump in on the conversation as you'd like.
Sure, happy to start, I guess. In terms of opportunities in this field, I guess there are abundant opportunities, right? The field is growing. I'd say the West is waking up. The East becomes more important. Religions are more significant. And I think if we were entrepreneurs, we would see this as an opportunity. I think the world, 80% of the world sees itself as religious, more or less, right? And theory is lagging behind. So what are the benefits? I think theory can benefit practice, right? Theory also needs to catch up. And then maybe another key, I think, benefit potential one is if we think that the world is in crisis, and this is a bit more trickier, I think, then what kind of responses are needed and what role do values play in this? And so some of my work on Desire the Futures, we try to engage with these questions of values. And I think religion also has something to say to these concerns, which is a bit trickier than the normal description of religion in the field. I think also there, I think we need to catch up and think about how can religion in scholarship play a role in understanding crises and how crises are tackled by people driven by their faith.
Yeah, I'll echo those points. I think, what you've heard already in the conference today, and if you were able to participate in the last couple of years, it's obvious that there's a lot of interest in topics related to the intersection of entrepreneurship and religion, no shortage of creative and exciting research opportunities on a variety of topics. What I see as a challenge, thinking about this from a reviewer and an editor point of view, is that it's important that papers on entrepreneurship and religion, whether religion is used as a context or a religious orientation is used as an individual level trait or characteristic, it's important that the analysis and the findings from a study, whether it's theoretical, empirical, qualitative, quantitative, is described in a way that it would be interesting or useful even to scholars who are not specialists in entrepreneurship and religion. So what can if religion is used as a context, what can I as an entrepreneurship scholar learn about some other context I'm interested in from what has been found here about religion? I see a lot of papers, a lot of entrepreneurship papers that have the form, this is a study of the impact of education on entrepreneurial behavior in country X among population Y. And there's very little discussion in the paper of the unique characteristics of country X. What is it about population Y that makes that population different from some other population, so that the reader can extrapolate what's the mechanism, what's the underlying principle that has now been revealed, which I could then potentially apply to studying some other context or looking at the impact of some other trait. And if religion is used as a context or as an individual attribute simply because you find it interesting or simply because it's convenient, you happen to have access to a population of religious entrepreneurs, that's great, but that's not enough to make the paper valuable to entrepreneurship scholars in general. So I'd say always keeping that sort of generalizability in mind when presenting findings and results is extremely important.
I might add another challenge, which I also see, and I think that this conference today is quite an illustration of this challenge. When engaging with religion and religious entrepreneurship today, we can't do it, superficially. There is a huge tradition in social sciences about, on the study of religion. We listened today, to the Nathan French presentation. We have an anthropology of religion, dating back to the beginning of the 19th. The same with psychology and William James. We have a sociology of religion with Durkheim and others. We have a philosophy of religion. Some might say even an economy of religion, citing even Adam Smith, whatever. So when we enter this field, we can't enter it naked or culturally naked. Religion is not just another plus or minus variable we will add to our studies. We have to speak from a given tradition and work with others who might be specialists of religious studies or might work already, in the field, and work together to understand what is our understanding, our definition of religion, because there are so many. How do we approach, religion? Is it a cultural system? Is it a system of meaning? Is it a lived experience? Is it a set of practices? Is it a set of beliefs and so on? And be able to articulate a reflection around it. Because studying religious entrepreneurship is a fabulous opportunity to actually engage with interdisciplinarity in entrepreneurship. It's a fabulous place to do so. But we can't do it, in dilettante. So, and this is quite a challenge, I think.
Now, I would add to it, as I've been reflecting on this question, I think that there's two big overlapping challenges, which, as Ali will kind of address the opportunity, right? If we can address these challenges, I think we can even better make greater contributions. And I think some of these were reiterated throughout the day so far, but the first one is that most of us, when we choose to study this, we're bringing in our own personal values. And there's probably this me search, as Dean Shepard and colleagues would call it, that the reason why we've chosen to study here. And I think in the SV intro to their special issue article, they kind of mentioned it, that they had this quote, "This engagement often being at the expense of the study's analytical rigor." And so this notion that we are bringing in biases in the questions that we select, and we might, not pay as much attention to methods. And also the second overlapping challenge is that and when I say we, I'm talking about the entrepreneurship scholars in the Zoom room. We are not trained experts in religion, but we each have our own kind of depth of lived experiences in one narrow sense. But that is not reflective of everyone else. And so that can be a challenge, because we might use language, for example, that we're very familiar with, and we think that this is common language with religion, but it isn't to to everyone else. And so by overcoming those challenges with things like your diversity of your author team, having people that are from a different, religious background or country. I think that was a great one Miruna had mentioned earlier. Even gender, right? As a woman, I experience a religious tradition different than a man in it. Or bringing in some of the religious scholars. This diversity of the author team, I think, can overcome some of these challenges and also help contribute to even better, better research that can move forward.
Can I jump in, Kylie? Yeah, I guess to piggyback onto Peter's comment, and this is something that I've sort of grappled with myself in the last year or so, is despite us obviously all being fascinated with religion or aspects of religion as individually as scholars, what is it about whatever it is that we're studying that is of broader appeal to mainstream entrepreneurship, and how can some of the insights from the setting of some aspect of religion inform some of these bigger conversations that scholars that are, entrepreneurship scholars, but not necessarily interested in religion, what would make them kind of pause for thought and say, not normally interested in religion, but that's really interesting. That informs an aspect of decision making, or how entrepreneurs overcome uncertainty or whatever. So yeah, just a sort of thought I wanted to share. And I don't have the answers. It's just I grapple with it myself. It's difficult to try and frame things in a way that appeal to as broad of an audience as possible.
It sounds like from what everyone's shared, picking up on different aspects of the benefits and or opportunities and challenges, they kind of go across the theorization, the context, the methodology, co-authorship teams, and so forth. I really appreciated the exploration of a diverse array of topics, because I think people will encounter different elements of those depending where they are in the publication process. So thinking on each of the points that you shared, either practice or definitions, methods, etc., what would be some of the strategies or practices that authors could use to capitalize on opportunities or to mitigate the challenges that you've shared?
I think in terms of opportunities, engaging with opportunity is, or let me start with the challenges maybe. So if the challenge is that we have biases, as also reviewers might have biases, I think one option is to have co-author teams that mitigate the biases, right? And I had that with a couple of papers where different faith or no faith traditions, and we actually discussed this, and this showed as an opportunity. So in one case, for instance, I presented insights, practices, symbols to my co-authors, and they didn't see religion. And I said to them, look, it's here, right in your face. And they're like, we don't see it, right? And that is beautiful, right? Because that is exactly good. And normally we would expect almost like, inter-author reliability and so on, or validity. But actually in this case, after me explaining it to them, they saw it too, right? So it wasn't me just making it up. And that I think is quite powerful and might be mitigating biases we have, or even biases in language, or even seeing and not explaining the obvious. In terms of maybe opportunities, I think maybe two ways forward, I guess, in a way to categorize this, to two examples of ways forward. I think one that also relates to your question, Robert. I think religion can be something that is similar to other things, but can still be useful empirically, right? So we could say religion shapes the purpose of entrepreneurs, right? And that it matters for other kinds of purposes, right? We could say family values, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's actually fine if religion is then similar but different from other things, right? So I think one way forward is we look at religion being empirically important, but not necessarily theoretically distinct. It's theoretically important, but not necessarily theoretically distinct. An alternative way would be to look at where religion is distinct to some extent, and that's why theoretically important. So, for instance, in a couple of papers we wrote, we looked at what might make religion distinct, things like a metaphysical being, sacred scripture, a belief in a hereafter. And these characteristics of religion then also may have an impact on entrepreneurship, which are somewhat distinct in this case.
Jumping in, Peter. We'll stay with the same order that we did last time for ease.
Yeah, I mean, look, we deal with some of these positioning challenges in many entrepreneurship studies, right? So, well, what is an entrepreneur? What is the essence of entrepreneurship? We're still debating those issues, decades after the entrepreneurship field has been established. Well, there are some kinds of papers and discussions for which really getting at that sort of ontological issue is critical, but for many entrepreneurship studies, it isn't. Right? One can adopt a more conventional definition of entrepreneurship or choose one of the commonly accepted conventional definitions, make it very clear to the audience that that's the definition that is in play, and then go off and do the analysis. I think, much is the same in dealing with papers on religion in the following sense. I mean, look, suppose that you're interested in religious orientation as an entrepreneurial trait, and how that affects behavior, and maybe how that interacts with different institutional contexts, including, those in which the entrepreneur's orientation is that of the dominant culture compared to those in which it goes against. It's different from the orientation of the culture. Okay, imagine, sort of to riff on Ali's point, imagine you're pitching this to a co-author or to a colleague. Okay, just replace the word religion or whatever the specific religious characteristic you're interested in and with a blank space. Just call it X or call it banana. How do entrepreneurs with characteristic banana behave compared to entrepreneurs with characteristic, apple? What if they're in an environment in which bananas are common as opposed to an environment in which bananas are very rare? And, you sort of walk through the logic of your theorizing or your research design, whatever. Does it make sense? Do you have a context in which you can tell a compelling story? Do you have good arguments? Do you have good evidence? Okay, once you figure that out, then, you take off the banana. Well, what I'm really talking about is a particular religious orientation or religious upbringing, or I'm talking about religious institutions, not, capital market characteristics or whatever it might be. Okay. If you go through that exercise first, you can check that you have an interesting story, one that, to echo my earlier remark, has something to say about the more general role of individual traits or the more general role of institutional conditions. And then you're less likely to be biased by idiosyncrasies of the specific religious attribute or characteristic that you're interested in, especially if you yourself have an affiliation. If you identify with that same characteristic yourself, you're less likely to run into those biases. Now, somebody might say, no, but religion is not like that. Religion is not a trait. Religion is not just an environmental context. It's deeper, it's broader, it impacts across multiple levels. It's this or that. Fine. You can also theorize, a banana that operates across multiple levels, or that is more than just an individual trait, but it's also a cultural attribute. It's something built into your DNA, whatever. I think that's where we sometimes run into problems, is thinking that for doing analysis, for doing research on entrepreneurship and religion, or entrepreneurship and faith, that religion/faith, is so entirely different that we can't grasp it and work it into our existing modes of thinking, such that we need to, kind of start with a blank canvas. I think that strategy, it might be successful in a few cases, but it's unlikely to work for most of the projects that we're interested in.
Yes, I was thinking about religion and entrepreneurship, and the specificities actually. This is a huge challenge. When there are authors who think that those, taking a cultural perspective, that actually religion is a fundamental layer of our cultures, and some say that, today of course, in Western societies, we have this secularization movement, although it's debatable if this takes place also in the US. It takes place for sure in Europe, but I'm not sure how much it takes place in the US. But well, this is another discussion, and for sure not in the other parts of the world. And therefore individuals now live, their religious or their faith or spirituality, call it as you like, in a silent or invisible mode. And it became pretty much an intimate practice, a hidden one, and very, very difficult to actually uncover. So I suppose that this might be one of the challenges, so even though we might use a definition of what religious is, an orientation, trait, cultural layer, whatever, this kind of discourse, set of beliefs, and so on. How do we find, and where do we find, faith, religion, and spirituality, even with the best, intentions? And it's quite difficult because of these intimate and hidden, features of doing religion today in our Western, at least European, society. So, and this is for sure a challenge for qualitative researchers. But then at the same time, I think it's a huge opportunity, the space of religion and entrepreneurship. Why? Because if I take religion as a system of meanings, this also implies that people rely on their beliefs, among which religious beliefs, others, to construct their realities and to give meaning to their actions. So we might say that if we understand how religious entrepreneurs engage with sense making while doing entrepreneurship, well, maybe in so doing, we might contribute back, to the mainstream, theorizing around sense making in entrepreneurship. And this might also be done in the area of identity. If we understand how religious entrepreneurs engage with identity construction, doing, undoing, loss, and so on, maybe the mechanism, the processes specific to these individuals might also inform back somehow the foundational theories of identities and research, more general research in entrepreneurship. So it's this space, we are in a very sensitive space, because it's like a microcosm, it's like a laboratory of this social construction of reality. And it allows us to understand what individuals do to construct reality, but what also they do in teams together with others in communities and so on. And our understanding might, I believe so, this is my own belief today, this might potentially contribute and give back actually to entrepreneurship, as a field. Because for sure, our implicit discussion today is about the legitimacy of the field and the contribution of the field, because we are at the beginning of it, I suppose. So what is our role, how we should do it, what we should do it, and in what ways actually what we are doing here might also be relevant to all of us, in the community. And this is a recurrent question, people in gender entrepreneurship are asking themselves for decades, what is the relevance of what we found on women entrepreneurs for the rest, of the mainstream theory? For migrant entrepreneurship, what is the relevance of what we are finding here? But in a sense, is there such a, the mainstream entrepreneur, does he or she exist? I wonder, it's also a construction, a cultural construction, a set of discourses, values and norms we attach to this figure. So, and I'm sure that, if we had here, feminist theories, they might say, yes, this figure doesn't exist. So in a sense, we might ask ourselves, what is our reference point to which we should contribute? But yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Miruna. Stephanie, you had some interesting thoughts on, with your expertise in international entrepreneurship as well, about that being an analogy for an emergent field that became established legitimately as well. I'm curious on your reflections or thoughts on the space. This is a segue question, my apologies, not prepared in advance. If you have any thoughts you want to jump in on with this topic.
No, that's all right. You know, my background is in international entrepreneurship, and I guess I came into the field not long after it had been kind of in this emergent field. And so I just see a lot of the similar parallels to, you know, is this legitimate? How do we get it, you know, published? Let's have these conferences that get together, right? And it's this evolution. And so I think that there are some parallels there, right? Because they're, you know, how is this different? How is it legitimate? How do we, you know, and so some of the, you know, one piece that always sticks in my mind is language, and language is very important. It was in that area, and I think it is especially important in the area of religion. We need to be careful with the language we use, not just that we're using our personal language that we're used to, but that we're clearly defining our terms, we're being consistent, and we're not substituting all these words throughout it. So I think that is, I guess, one takeaway in that analogy. And I'm kind of curious, I think we had shared before, I'm kind of curious to see where this will end up, because I've watched kind of international entrepreneurship, how it's kind of flowed, and how it even started more concentrated in one region of the world, and it's probably more researched in another area and in different kind of journals and whatnot. And this will be the same thing with religion, I imagine, on how it's this journey, and it's applicable in so many different ways. And probably a lot of synergies there as well, because I think Miruna, you kind of alluded to it, how Eastern and Western, right? There's so much room for comparative analysis there as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much. I've been monitoring the chat, and if you have any questions, participants, feel free to jump in on those as well. We did actually have a few questions from the earlier main session on the special issue that I think were quite pertinent for our conversation as well today. And one was from Alia Crocker, and she was asking about what advice or how do you navigate as an author publishing in this space when perhaps you're getting very diverse reviewer letters back, because you are dealing with quite a few different literatures, maybe different contexts. I don't think this is a challenge unique to faith and entrepreneurship. It's a challenge in the publishing reviewing space. So I'm curious, opening it up to all panelists, what advice would you give a scholar who's having some challenges with navigating diverse reviewer perspectives?
Ask for help, ask the editor, contact the editor, because the editor should engage, you know, herself with these reviews and should provide a direction, you know. So yeah, ask for help. Don't say alone, don't guess, you know. Or if you make choices, you have, of course, to argue of why, you know, they must be sound, theoretically, you know, grounded or empirically, you know, justified. But for sure, I would first ask the editor.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, at all the top journals, editors are not supposed to be vote counters, right? The authors don't have to satisfy every point of every reviewer. And if the editorial decision letter did not provide clear guidance about how to deal with possibly conflicting suggestions from reviewers, then I completely agree with Miruna. It's appropriate to reach out to that editor and say, could we have a Zoom call, or could you explain an email? I'm a little confused about what I'm supposed to do here. But I think editors are convinced by revisions and you know, succinct response letters that show how the paper has changed, show how the substantive problems have been addressed. But you know, there's this tendency, I'm sure lots of you have heard discussion about it, of, you know, revisions coming in, and, you know, the manuscript is 45 pages and the response document is, you know, 82 pages. I mean, nobody wants that. And that comes from it's driven by highly risk-averse authors being afraid that if every, you know, spelling error pointed out by the reviewers is not addressed with a paragraph that begins, thank you so much for this insightful pointing out of the spelling error, that, you know, the paper will get rejected. And I think both editors and reviewers would rather not see that than see it. But yeah, editors should give clear guidance, especially if reviews are giving conflicting advice.
Rob, you recently had a paper accepted in this space. It was shared earlier in one of the sessions. Do you have any recent advice, having been successfully published in this space?
Yeah, so it was a paper with David Townsend and Lowell Busenitz, who I think are in the chat somewhere. So hello. Yeah, it was a paper that was looking at the sort of some of the common psychological foundations of religious belief, and how this can inform how entrepreneurs kind of navigate aspects of uncertainty. And it's interesting you asked this, because the review, the journey of the paper started out as us kind of setting this up predominantly as this is a paper that's going to advance the religion and entrepreneurship field. And that was sort of the opening kind of framing. And then we said, we're going to draw from the psychology or aspects of the psychology of religious belief. And this is, how we're going to do this. And we had fantastic reviewers and an editor, so we're very lucky in that respect. But as it kind of evolved, the framing kind of adjusted and went the other way. And I think this was for the best, because it helped us to speak to a broader audience. So we opened with uncertainty's a big deal, right? To say the least. How do entrepreneurs navigate this? And then we say, non-probabilistic reasoning is common within the psychology of religious belief. And then we sort of bring in the all of Brett's work and the other great papers in this conference. So I think, who knows, it's only just been accepted, but it'd be interesting to see what types of studies cite this. And my guess is that I hope we'll be able to hook in a much broader audience doing it this way, framing it in this way, as opposed to framing it as saying, here's a narrower conversation about religion and entrepreneurship, and we also inform conversations on uncertainty. So again, long story short, I think as this field evolves, being conscious about how we frame the paper, the lead framing, I think is important.
So maybe to add to this, I think not a unique but a distinct challenge for this field, given that it is an immersion field, is I think that we have not yet established a community, right? So that means for editors, finding the right reviewers, etc., is still a challenge. It doesn't mean that you have to be a religious scholar and so on, but oftentimes it helps, right, to have some expertise in it. If I'm an editor and I need to find 3 reviewers for institutional theory, that's easy, right? Whereas maybe for religion and entrepreneurship, it's harder, which means that we all need to sign up. We might want to use certain keywords to show our interest or capability, so that we do not get these very diverse reviews back. At least that moves them towards that direction. But I also would say that these distinct challenges then also, like when I teach entrepreneurship and I say, if something's annoying or tricky or challenging, that is an opportunity, right? And it might hint at the potential for a bigger contribution in terms of theorizing vis-a-vis other papers that are more incremental, where we speak to an established field and we just advance the field a half a step at a time. These might be big steps that are challenging in terms of putting it together, orchestrating it together. But if one gets this, I mean, we all know innovation is one way of innovation is recombination, right? So recombining these diverse reviews into something might be very, very powerful at the end.
We had another question, thank you panelists, from in the chat earlier on, and it was from Bing Bing, and it came up regarding when discussing religion in other countries or contexts, how can an author distinguish between religious practices and cultural practices when perhaps it's not entirely clear in situ that these are distinct? Should they be decoupled? Should they be dealt with together? This is quite a theoretical, specific conversation, but an interesting question nonetheless.
I have a response, well, part response and part funny comment to that. Don't know if anyone saw recently, Richard Dawkins, of all people, the Archbishop of New Atheism, said, I think on the BBC or one of the British news outlets, that he's a cultural Christian now, and he sort of sees the cultural value of how Christianity has affected the institutions of the UK. So why am I saying this? Oh, in response to the question about how do you deconflate culture and religion, I think it's really difficult to do that, right? Because they're so deeply entwined.
my swift response would be, you need contextual expertise, right? Global North scholars shouldn't go to the Global South and just say, let me try this, right? So it's a way of working together. And actually, so we're writing a paper now for an RSO special issue actually on decolonizing management scholarship. And it is, what we have done is, I think in the first step as Global North scholars, we have ignored the South. As a second step, we then kind of extracted data from the Global South, right? And we need to go towards integration or elevation of the Global South. And that means having different types of co-authorships who can actually disentangle culture and religion.
I was just going to say it goes back to language, right? And how to explain this where this distinction is unclear. Not everyone, if you're in that scenario, you understand it and that's your lived experience, but for others it isn't. And so for each of us, we have to be able to explain that context and make it clear to the reader, which can be challenging to do, but that's kind of our task, is educating each other on the context or how it is that we're bringing in. Sometimes that doesn't need to be put in, and tell the methods, and sometimes it's upfront because it's part of it. But I think it isn't that you can't do it. It's just how do you frame it, right? And knowing who your audience is. Do you start from one point or the other?
Maybe an additional way in doing so, it would be also to start thinking at religion as something we do, and we construct through language, but also through our practices, but also as researchers. So be aware of the fact that actually we have to be sensitive to the people's discourse and practices and own definition of what is religious and what is not. And for sure, it's easier to distinguish on the field a religious practice, attaching it to certain, patterns of behavior, than a religious belief or value. This, for sure, is much more complicated. But we should take, in this case, our participants as co-authors of our own interpretation, as when we are doing Joya, so we take their words, their sense making as a basis, as a data, and then we construct our interpretation. So for sure, yes, context sensitivity, because otherwise we will see things which are not, which are not true. Actually, our interpretation will not be valid or trustful. But then be also aware that even in a certain context, people are different, to people living in the same village, in the same city, educated in similar ways, even members of the same family, will actually provide different interpretations of their own behavior, of their own choices. To what extent do they attribute this, to their religious education's beliefs and so on? So, and this is part actually of the field. This is part of the data and should enter somehow the interpretation and be taken into account, I think.
Yeah, I would answer the question in a slightly different way. I mean, the answer is it depends. I mean, there may be cases where religion is being used only as a context, right? As a cultural or social or institutional context, that's absolutely fine. There are other cases where, for reasons that my colleagues have shared, right, religion or religious faith or spirituality is being modeled or conceived of as playing a different role in the analysis. That's all fine too. I think the solution to this problem is just to be very clear in how the researcher imagines, religion or religious belief potentially playing a role. If it's something different from culture, I mean, again, we have lots of studies of entrepreneurship and other phenomena, where we're looking at the effect of some background conditions that are related to but distinct from culture. If you think about different levels of institutional analysis, informal norms, beliefs, and other aspects of culture, think of that as the highest level, but then there are intermediate levels like formal institutions, the legal system, the political system, maybe contract law, all of those are contextual factors that can affect how entrepreneurship is manifest in a particular circumstance. But there are distinctions among them. And so if spirituality or religion means something other than culture, that's absolutely fine. Just the burden is on us to explain what we think it is, how we're analyzing, how we're approaching it, how it fits into the rest of our story.
I see that we're at the top of the hour, and so we're finishing up our panel. I know we started a couple of minutes late, so I want to just open it up to panelists for your final thoughts, any burning ideas that you haven't, or thoughts you haven't, reflections you haven't had the chance to share from each of you, and then we will wrap up this panel. Miruna, would you like to jump in first on final thoughts?
Just to tell you all that we are looking forward to your submissions and some good and interesting pieces of work. And that's it. And we are, don't hesitate to contact any of us in the editorial team with your questions, ideas, and so on. We are ready for you and very much looking for it.
Stephanie.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Nathan French's presentation this morning. And one thing that stood out was when he said we should make what is familiar feel unfamiliar and what is unfamiliar feel familiar. And I think that's I guess I'd end with that, on that we need to step outside our comfort zones. And I really see this as an opportunity for each of us to be curious, learn, and kind of grow together.
Ali.
So I think that this topic of religion and entrepreneurship is really part of a wider conversation of integrating different life spheres, right? So in a way, it's about seeing that modernity faces certain challenges and religion contributes towards that dialogue. So I think on the one hand, we need to find out what this means for entrepreneurship, but we also need to connect it to this wider question about how are different values for different life spheres integrated into, let's say, business and entrepreneurship, but also into other sectors. And I think there's a lot of opportunity. And for entrepreneurship scholars, what's better than opportunities, I guess. And thank you all for being here.
Peter.
I'll just add, on behalf of the Strategic Entrepreneurship Journal, we don't have a particular special issue to promote, but we welcome submissions at the intersection of religion and entrepreneurship, theoretical, empirical, conceptual, qualitative, quantitative, and are very interested in seeing these as part of this new and growing movement in the field.
So thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists, Miruna, Ali, Peter, Stephanie, and Rob, for today's panel session. Really interesting. We traversed a lot of ground, and we're looking forward to seeing your respective papers come through.
So first off, Kylie, thank you. Thank you for moderating the panel. Panelists, thank you for being here, coming from all different places at all different times and all different conflicts that you've navigated to be here.